all the other, for all the people that are virtually connected with us from all over the world. So welcome to Cyprus, welcome to Limassol, and welcome to the 4th annual meeting of INTEGRAPE. And this is the final conference of the cost action. The cost action generally lasts for 4 years. And I should say that I'm quite emotional to see you in presence, because last time that we saw in presence each other was in Slovenia, in Ljubljana. It was exactly 2 years ago. We couldn't believe that the world was changing. And now I think the world is also changing with something else that we all avoid and we all refuse to accept. Please, I think, stand up, everybody, and say no to the war. For 1 minute for saying no to the war, whatever wars in the world, and we don't want any war. And we have to also understand that in the world there are so many wars, and this is one of the wars. And we didn't focus very much that there were wars all over Europe, close to Europe, outside Europe, and this is important to say, no more wars. We don't need wars anymore. We want to be scientists, we want to be people, social people, we want to really get together, mingle, whatever color of the skin, whatever religion, whatever languages, whatever, just people, just human beings. We need a better world and we have to make it. With this, thank you. With this, I would like very much to welcome again to the 4th annual meeting of INTEGRAPE. This time, the title is the Data Integration to Maximize the Power of Omics for Grapevine Improvement Health under the Grapevine Improvement. And this was in the frame of the cost action. And this is the title of the cost action. I was a little bit confused and I was still thinking about the war. And the theme of the meeting, let me excuse again, the theme of the meeting is the data integration for grapevine research in the context of the environmental transition. And as you know, we were thinking about environmental transition, we're still thinking about environmental transition, and again, we're still thinking about a transition again. And this is there is a scientific program that is comprised of 7 plenary talks and 20 oral presentations that are spread in 7 sessions. And so I thank all of you, but I have to give a special thanks to George Manganaris, who is the convener, and George was offered to be the host for this final conference, and we accepted. At the beginning, there was another choice that we made, was the Belgrade, but and then Belgrade they need to refuse because of the pandemic circumstances, and Georgia decided to offer this location and this wonderful organization. So thank you very much for what you have done and for the effort that you put for making this conference for real. Finally, it's an hybrid conference. There are people connected. Let me say hello also to everybody that are connected through the virtuality. And please, Giorgio, it's your time.
Thank you very much, Mario, for the introduction. For today, I will make a short overview of the Cyprus viticultural sector. And at 6:30, around local time, we will have the inaugural talk by Cornelius van Leeuwen. After that, we will have a welcome reception cocktail. And then the rest of the night is free. And tomorrow we start from early morning. So the presentation, I will try to provide you the specialty of the viticultural sector in Cyprus. First of all, we would like to welcome you in Limassol or Lemesos. It's a cosmopolitan waterfront city, as you have realized. Here is located Cyprus University of Technology, my institution, that is located in the old city of Limassol, in renovated buildings, which constitute part of the city architectural heritage. We have 6 faculties and 13 departments, among them the Department of Agricultural Sciences, Biotechnology, and Food Science. That is the only one in Cyprus dealing with the agricultural sector. My research group is the Fruit Sciences and Post-Harvest Group. If anyone is interested to receive further information, fruitsciences.eu is the website. And now moving to the presentation of can we remove the upper part? Can we remove the upper part to see the? Yes. Okay. So actually, we have some very special characteristics. Its own rooted plants of the European Vitis vinifera, because Cyprus is the only area in Europe that is phylloxera free. The majority have the bush vine plantation, vine growing on hill and semi-hill areas. There are small areas of individual vineyards, and 90% of them are without irrigation. Some facts and figures about the cultivated area. There is a descending trend from 2004 onwards because the production was heavily supported by the state until 2004. And actually, nowadays, there is a decrease, and we're talking about 7,700 hectares that are being cultivated, most of them with local cultivars. Also, we have the well-known Commandaria area that accounts for approximately 900 hectares without significant changes over the last years. Cyprus is having 5 appellation areas of control origin regions. And here is a nice picture, a nice overview from Paphos district, where you can see vineyards, some of them newly planted, and some of them are planted about 70 years ago. And I would like here to stress your attention to the fact that you can see 3 cultivars, one next to the other. You can see Xynisteri, Maratheftico, and Mavro, one next to the other. And the reason is the fact that Maratheftico is having female flower and they need pollination. For that reason, they put one next to the other. In addition, it's quite complicated, the production, and you can see that it's we have low yield and very tough conditions, no mechanization at all. So we have a quite expensive cost of production. If we try to make a short analysis about the viticultural sector in Cyprus, we can say that strong points are the fact that we have indigenous cultivars that are dominating. Why? Because they are highly adaptable to adverse climatic conditions. It's a phylloxera-free area and there is a long tradition. We can consider as weak points the fact that we have a lack of clonal selection, a lack or limited irrigation, small and scattered holdings with high production cost. We consider as opportunities the exploitation of indigenous cultivars, the improvement of traditional products based on scientific evidence, and the increasing demand for quality wine. Threats, okay, I have to remove it. Sorry about that. It's climate change, the potential loss of highly promising cultivars because there is not a critical mass of research, and generally the lack of critical mass of senior and high-profile early-stage researchers. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Now, These are the main indigenous cultivars. Mavro, the first one in terms of production volumes, Mavro means black. Xynisteri, the most important white cultivar, and some other very promising cultivars, namely Gianoudi, Maratheftico, Morocanella, and Promara. The promising cultivars like Maratheftico and Gianoudi have problem with fruit setting, and jointly with the main stakeholder in Cyprus, we try to find some solutions, and we already managed to have some advancement. You can see here the main challenge of Gianoudi, that's supposed to be the very promising cultivar, particularly amenable to aging, is having severe problem with fruit setting, because as you can see, the flower is female. Now, Mavro is about 3,000 hectares, Xynisteri 2,000 hectares. They are moderate, vigorous cultivars with very good adaptability in drought and hot climate, like the one we have in Cyprus. From these two cultivars, it's being produced the brand name of Cyprus, Commandaria, a protected designation of origin products that is composed from dried wines of these two cultivars. The legislation does not define any usage ratio about these two cultivars. In order to produce Commandaria, the product should derive one of these 14 villages. And you can see some villages are being dominated by Xynisteri and some others with Mavro. Regarding production regulations, you need registered vineyards at least 5 years old and non-irrigated. The training system should be low bush. Yield should be below 6 tons per hectare. Dehydration method should be only sun drying, and they have to reach a particular level of sugars at harvest and after sun drying. You can apply for fortification, and for the aging process, we need at least 2 years in oak barrels. And there is a sensory evaluation panel. This is some pictures about the two cultivars at harvest, Mavro and Xynisteri, and after the drying process. They follow a traditional method to crush and produce the wine. In this picture on the right, you can see the president of the Commandaria Museum. There is a museum about Commandaria in Cyprus. On the right, Fabio Mencarelli from University of Pisa, and the rest, my ex-PhD student, Savas Konstantinou, who did his dissertation on Commandaria wine. This is some pictures about juice production and fermentation and the aging process about Commandaria. More or less, Commandaria is something similar to other wines like Vinsanto that is being produced in Greece, in Santorini Island, Pedro Jimenez in Spain, and Amarone, the well-known Amarone in Italy. So, why Commandaria? It's the earliest protected designation of origin wine product of the world. The name is from the Greek times, it's Cyprus Nama, still used by the church, and there is a long story behind it. There are also some significant advancements and developments over the recent years. Since 2005, we have only 4 big wineries dominating the local and export market. Today, we have 10 new labels from other wineries. And we have a large increase in the retail price from average 11 euros to 16 euros per bottle. It's also worth noting the fact that today, the 1 kilo of dried grape is being purchased by 2 euros, almost double price compared to 5 years before. So this is a traditional sun-drying method of the grapes, and we are quite lucky by the fact that in Cyprus we are not having heavy rains during the period after harvest. What are, however, the critical points of this traditional drying method? The optimum conditions require high diurnal temperatures and low ambient moisture. Grapes are spread to nets placed in large open sites specifically suitable for this purpose on account of their orientation and gentle slope. The grapes are turned over by hand periodically in order to have a uniform concentration of their components. And berry drying has to be carried out moderately in order to avoid excessive evaporation, which may adversely affect the pressing process. Advantages: easy to set up, no capital cost, easy to maintain, and quite effective. Disadvantages or limiting factors: no protection from rain, intense labor, limited aeration, mixed with dirt, and easy reach of rodents, foxes, and rabbits. So there is obviously a need to amend the drying method. And some wineries already applied the contemporary drying method, as you can see in these pictures. And also, they offer also the possibility to protect by rain. This contemporary drying method offers protection from rain, cleaner berries, easier to lay and gather up, shading winery logistics. Disadvantages: initial capital cost, and also the transfer and storage considerations. For that reason, you can see that some vineyards doing both, the traditional and the contemporary, because of the logistic purposes that I mentioned before. If you check on databases about research on Commandaria, you will find very limited number of results. Some of them are results that were generated by the PhD program of Savas Konstantinou. Among them, he tried to elucidate alternative dehydration methods. And we find out some interesting results that have been disseminated in a form of 3 publications. What are the future perspectives for Commandaria? We can position Commandaria at the high end of the drinks market. We can follow the example of Napa Valley and Tuscany. There is a story, so we can try to find a way to learn this story to the world. And there are emerging markets like millennials that can care about the story of the brand. Also, some other future perspectives can be considered the fact that Paphos tradition of sun-drying the grapes on their roofs, fermentation in clay pots or concrete vats, differentiation depending on the variety, depending on long aging, and probably a new style of Commandaria without the need of aging. I said for an average value of 70 euros per bottle, but there are some places that produce Commandaria style, but they cannot use this name because it's being produced in other areas, like Panama, small whiters that they are selling this premium product for almost 80 euros for half liter. We can try to find advancements in the drying method, and thanks to transfer of knowledge from University of Pisa, we can try to find out drying with fast water loss without ambient control, while dehydration is water losses in closed facility. This is going against to the regulation that today we have about Commandaria, but this is really an interesting perspective that we need to consider in the future, following a procedure that simulates the production of Amarone. In terms of research, in my group, we are concluding a project, the Vitis Aroma project, jointly with Kiperunda Winery, and also the support of 2 Italian and 1 Greek university, University of Viterbo, University of Pisa, and Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. We try to evaluate the indigenous grape cultivar Xynisteri under variable vineyard conditions through sensorial analysis and aroma characterization. And the objective is to map the global transcriptomic profile as well as specific gene families and pathways involved in volatile organic compounds of Xynisteri grapes. There were a lot of field work and there were a lot of lab work, and the results are currently at the level of paper production. Notably, last year, Andrea Pavlou won a Marie Curie, the prestigious Marie Curie program for individual fellowship jointly with my university and the Zambartas Winery. The title of this project that starts April 1st deals with the investigation of the underlying resilience and the physiological adaptive response of Xynisteri cultivar under climate changes. And we will have the support of several people from Italy, from France, Vassilios Fotopoulos from my university, and Cornelius Van Leeuwen from University of Bordeaux. Just an overview of the objectives of this program. We try to investigate the water use efficiency capacity and the adaptability of qualitative attributes of Xynisteri with carbon isotope IRMS under natural climatic conditions, explore volatile organic compounds emission as a light stress resistant mechanism for adaptation to dry and warm climates, and decipher key biochemical and physiological components behind the heat stress acclimation ability of Xynisteri. Both Andrea and Degli are here, physically present for the meeting, and we're looking forward to exchange ideas with the delegates. The end user outreach goal of this project is to support with sound scientific data the suitability of Xynisteri as a variety that can be used as a long-term adaptation measure from countries where their viticulture is already negatively impacted by increasingly warm and dry growing conditions. And that's all for me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Georgios. It was a very nice presentation to introduce the Cyprus viticulture and your activities and your department and the work of the work that you're doing here with your group and interacting with many other labs in Europe and not only in Europe. So thank you very much. I think now it's time for giving the word to Kees Cornelis van Leeuwen, that is waiting for us since half an hour. So Cornelis, thank you for being with us. And Cornelis accepted to give this presentation virtually. He couldn't come to Cyprus, but what to say about Cornelis? He is one of the main editor of N1. He's the head of the group of the people working in plasticity, in adaptation, in grapevine, and it's very well known. And I think I will stop with the introduction, only saying thank you very much for being with us, and we are looking forward to hear your presentation. Thank you, Kees.
Okay, thank you very much for your kind invitation. I hope that the sound is good. My presentation is about the impact of climate change in viticulture and potential adaptations. Of course, I would prefer to be in Cyprus with you because I love Cyprus, but I couldn't make it this time. So I will present you the major effects of climate change in viticulture, but I will go pretty quickly through it because, well, you're all experts and you know about this. Then my second point is, what are the solutions that the research community can offer? And I'm questioning whether we are currently working on the most relevant topics. I think we should be inspired by existing empirical adaptations. And we can take some nice examples from Cyprus, as George showed in his presentation. So, well, the major effects of climate change in viticulture on a global scale. As you know, atmospheric CO2 has been increasing over the past 70 years. We started with something like 280 ppm in the 1950s, and now we are about 410 ppm. And this has an effect on increasing temperatures and also a modification of rainfall patterns. And if we look on this map a little bit closer to what's happening in Europe, we see that rainfall is decreasing in Southern Europe and is increasing in Northern Europe. What are the effects of these higher temperatures and increased drought in Southern Europe? The vine is strongly reacting to higher temperatures, and there is a marked shift in phenology. One of the longest data series about phenology is the one from Alsace, gathered by Eric Duchesne and Christophe Schneider, which started in the 1950s. And we can see that bud break was advanced over this period by 10 days, flowering by 23 days, veraison by as much as 39 days, and harvest by almost a month. And this shift in phenology is observed everywhere in the world. For instance, if you go to Châteauneuf-du-Pape in Côte-du-Rhône in France, harvest used to be in the last week of September or early October in the 1950s and 1960s, and today it's early September. Grape composition is modified, and more sugar in the grapes means more alcohol in the wine. So this is data from Languedoc region over 40 years. Alcohol content in wine was increased by 3%, pH by 0.2, and total acidity decreased by 1.5 gram per liter. Wine typicity is also modified. And we can say that wines today maybe are less drinkable because they have increased cooked fruit aromas and more alcohol and less acidity, so less freshness. Water deficit has a major impact in yield, and as soon as vines are subject to reduced water availability, the yields are lower. All the yield components are impacted, in particular berry size. Water deficit does not necessarily mean bad quality. And in fact, in many situations with water deficit, wine quality is actually improved because water deficit increases the content of anthocyanins and phenolics in grapes. So red wines are more concentrated. And recent research have also shown that many aromas in grapes and wines are in fact improved by water deficit. Not severe stress, of course, but moderate water deficits. An issue which is maybe a little bit less studied, but which is very important, is the issue of declining water resources. Most of us in research, we look at the level of the vine or the level of a vineyard block or a wine growing estate, but we rarely look at the level of water catchment or a country or even a whole wine growing area. And water scarcity is an increasingly important issue in the Mediterranean basin. Close to 50% of the world's vineyards are located in this area, about 3 million hectares. And fresh water resources are very much limited. Rainfall is low in this area and is even expected, which you see on the right panel, to be much decreased by 2050. Vineyards were traditionally dry farmed in this area, but now some of the vineyards starts to be irrigated. So we need to question what will be the impact of irrigation in the available water resources on a global scale in this area. I think there's a good example from Spain, because among Mediterranean countries today, Spain is the country where irrigation is most widely developed. And this is very recent. In 1995, which is not so long ago, almost all Spanish vineyards were dry farmed, no irrigation, just rain. And today, as you can see here, 40% of the Spanish vineyards are irrigated. And this is putting considerable tension on available freshwater resources. Today, about 1 million cubic meter is used for irrigation of vines in Spain, 1 million cubic meter. And a significant percentage of this water is drawn from non-renewable aquifers. So this means that this irrigation can go on for maybe 20 years, 30 years, or 40 years, but one day they will run out of water. And many of these infrastructures have been funded by the European Union. So let's look at the blue water footprint of vineyards. In the dry farmed vineyards, about 20,000 liters of water is used per hectare per year, and this is mainly water use in the cellar. If you irrigate vineyards with deficit irrigation, you use approximately 100 millimeter a year, which is 1 million of liter per water per hectare per year. Fully irrigated vineyards use 400 millimeter of water per year. This is 4 million liters of water per year, which is roughly between 500 and 1,000 liter of water to produce just one bottle of wine. That's a lot of water, isn't it? Now, there is a cultural risk associated also with irrigation. If dry farming is the standard, then growers are very innovative in selecting drought-resistant plant material and designing drought-resistant training system. And in the Mediterranean basin, we can build on 8,000 years of expertise in dry farming. But as soon as irrigation becomes available, this long-term expertise is very rapidly lost. And for instance, in La Mancha in Spain, this used to be a big dry grown area with almost 500,000 hectares under vines. As soon as irrigation was introduced, growers started to plant drought-sensitive varieties like Merlot and Tempranillo, and they changed their training systems from gobelet bush vines to cordon-pruned vertical shoot-positioned canopies. And in dry climates, Grenache can really well resist to drought, but varieties like Merlot and Tempranillo cannot. So this increases the need of irrigation water. Now, if La Mancha in 30 or 40 years' time runs out of water, then the expertise of knowing how to grow vines in dry conditions will be lost, and then probably La Mancha will be a desert. Another point is that as soon as irrigation becomes available, vineyards move from hillside location to plains. In the Languedoc, Audrey Nollet did her PhD on the Vallée de l'Orbe, and she showed that in Languedoc, water for irrigation is only available in the valleys and the plains. And in these settings, with deep soils and irrigation, yields up to 100 hectoliters per hectare are possible. In hillside locations, viticulture is perfectly possible with other varieties and other training systems. Water for irrigation is not available there. And the growers, they produce very good wines, but only with yields around 30 hectoliters per hectare. And so that means that very likely with the appearance recently of irrigation in the valleys, that viticulture in the plains will outperform economically the traditional hillside locations. And there is a risk that all the viticulture from the hillside locations will move to the plains. And in the hillside locations, there's no alternative for viticulture. If the viticulture disappears, no other crop can be grown. Whereas in the valleys, it is possible to grow other crops. So this brings me to the next question. What solutions the research community can offer to adapt to climate change? And are we currently working on the most relevant topics? So let's have a look at the world wine production. As you know, Spain, Italy, and France are the leading wine producing countries. The USA and China are also big in viticulture, but only a small part of their vineyards are used for producing wine. A lot of it is used for growing table grapes. So roughly in Europe, there's 3 million hectares of vineyards, and in the New World, 1 million hectares of vineyards. And now I would like to compare the output of research in different wine producing countries compared to their area under vines. So which country produces the biggest research effort in vine and wine sciences? This is an interesting question, isn't it? What do you think? Surprisingly, it's Germany. Here I plotted the number of research articles published for 1,000 hectares of vines. So this is research output relative to the acreage under vines. Germany has an outstanding output compared to its area under vines. I remind that the vineyards in Germany is around 100,000 hectares. Australia and the USA are also major players. They are performing very well in terms of research output. France, Italy, and Spain, they lag behind. You can see that Italy is somehow catching up, but France and Spain lag behind in their research output. So Germany, Australia, and the USA are leading countries in terms of research in viticulture and enology compared to their acreage under vines. And we see this also in the leading journals in vine and wine sciences. Historically, the American Journal in Viticulture and Enology is one of the oldest journals in vine and wine sciences. It was established in 1950, and it always had a good impact factor. And the Australian Journal of Grape and Wine Research appeared in the late 1990s and very quickly had an impact factor which was even higher than the American Journal. So that means that over the past 20 years, the two leading journals in vine and wine sciences were from the USA and Australia. Germany and France historically had scientific journals, Germany with Vitis and France with the Journal International des Sciences de la Vigne et du Vin. But in terms of impact factor, these journals were poorly performing. Surprisingly, no peer-reviewed international journal in vine and wine sciences has ever existed in Italy and Spain, which are major wine-producing countries. Recently, Eno1 appeared. It's an international journal, but it was founded in Europe. If we look to the output of agricultural research, the dominating position of America is absolutely confirmed. Worldwide, in agricultural research, the USA produces 25% of the research papers published in agricultural research. And also in the Shanghai classification, among the top 10 agricultural universities in the world, the only wine-producing country that has 2 universities in the top 10 of the Shanghai classification in agricultural research is the USA, with the University of Davis and Cornell. So just what I want to say is that the level of research in the USA is very, very high. And I think we can say that over the past 20 or 30 years, research in America and Australia have inspired researchers in Europe. Until the end of the 20th century, the research in Europe used to be very descriptive and mainly based on observations. That does not mean that the research was bad, because the observations were very good. And myself, I was trained by Professor Seguin from Bordeaux University. He did terroir research and he did very good observations, but with not very complex experimental setup. Generally, there were no replicates and very little statistics, and mainly observations and measurements. European researchers until the 1980s or even early 1990s, they used to publish in French, German, Spanish, or Italian. And there was one American researcher, I think it was Mark Matthews, who said everything which is not published in English is not worth reading. American and Australian researchers has always been based on a sound experimental setup with replicates and statistics. And of course, because English is their native language, they've always been publishing in English. And today, the American way of publishing research with a sound experimental setup, replicates, statistics, has become the world standard. And in fact, the Europeans have totally adapted to this way of doing research. And I think there was a good evolution. We learned very much from our colleagues from Australia and America to do good research. But at the same time, the topics addressed in the New World research were somehow imported in Europe. And I'm not sure that that was a good evolution. Because there are major differences in viticultural models. In particular, if we compare the viticultural model from the Mediterranean basin with what's happening in the New World. The viticultural model from Northern Europe, with the main example Germany, is also very different. But in my presentation, I will just compare the viticultural model from Southern Europe with the New World. So in the Mediterranean basin, the history of viticulture is very long, thousands of years. In the New World, it's very short. The time span is decades. Wine identity in the Mediterranean basin is the origin. The wines are sold by the origin. Wine is from Nemea in Greece, or from Tuscany in Italy, or from La Rioja in Spain. In the New World, the wine identity comes from the variety. This varietal diversity is very high in the Mediterranean basin. There are hundreds of varieties around. In the New World, the varietal diversity is very much restricted to 10 or 12 international varieties. In the Mediterranean basin, growers used to plant varieties adapted to local climatic conditions. And that's the reason why they do not grow the same varieties in Burgundy or in Cyprus or in southern Spain. In the New World, varieties are planted because the growers want to have a varietal typicity. So they plant Chardonnay, not necessarily because it's adapted to the local climatic conditions, but just because they want to produce a wine with a typicity of Chardonnay. Training systems in the Mediterranean basin are traditional and highly diverse. For instance, high-density plantations in Champagne and Burgundy, or goblet-trained bush vines in southern Spain. In the New World, training systems are very innovative, and there's a lot of research on training systems. Historically, in the Mediterranean basin, the vineyards were rain-fed, although there is some introduction of irrigation recently. And in the New World, almost all the vineyards are irrigated. I'm not saying that one model is better than the other. Both models are perfectly fine. But I just want to say that the viticultural model in the Mediterranean basin is very different from the viticultural model in the New World. And each type of viticulture has its specific assets. What are the assets of the viticulture in Southern Europe? The assets of viticulture in Southern Europe is that it builds on thousands of years of expertise. It can draw on a very high diversity of the varieties which are grown. It builds on the adaptation of varieties and training system to local conditions, and in particular, local climatic conditions. Wines are branded by the origin, typicity in relation to the origin, which we call terroir expression. New World viticulture builds on innovation, a diversity of training systems. We have a lot of research on training systems, irrigation management, and wines are branded by the variety and the name of the company. Once again, both models are perfectly fine, but both models are different. And I think that Mediterranean countries should take more advantage of their specific assets. And there is a tendency in Mediterranean countries to mimic research topics which are relevant for New World viticulture, but which are not necessarily relevant for European viticulture. And I think research in Mediterranean countries does not enough build on existing local expertise. And there is so much local expertise, and we should use this. And I will just give you an example of this on drought management. So if we take the topic of research on deficit irrigation, in the New World, research on deficit irrigation is a hot topic. And this totally makes sense. If you move from full irrigation with 400 millimeters of water used per year to deficit irrigation, you save 3 million liters of water a year. But this does not make sense in Southern Europe. When you move from dry farming to deficit irrigation, you spend 1 million liter of extra water a year. So in the New World, deficit irrigation is a big step forward, but it is not the case in Southern Europe. And despite this obvious observation, many research proposals in Europe propose deficit irrigation as a solution to climate change, and they are funded by the European Union. This is just a screenshot from an example, but there are plenty of examples around. Read this: vine irrigation in the former Languedoc-Roussillon region production potential maintained through water savings. But if you irrigate in Languedoc, you don't save water. You spend 1 million liter extra water per hectare per year. So I think we should be more inspired by existing empirical adaptations in our research orientations. The vine is a drought-resistant Mediterranean crop species. The vine thrives in dry climates, like almond trees and olive trees. This is a typical landscape in Spain, in Aragon. Look at this nice picture of vineyards, olive trees, and almond trees. And people have been growing vines for thousands of years in the Mediterranean basin. It is totally possible to produce very high quality wines in very dry conditions. For instance, Alpha Estate in the appellation Amindion in Greece, they produce beautiful wines in an area with only 430 millimeters of rain per year with the local variety Xinomavro. In Aragon, in Spain, where it rains even less, 350 millimeters of rain, Bodegas Bodem produces very high quality wine in the appellation Carignana with Grenache grafted on 110R, planted in bush vines. And these wines are very, very good. And this shows that it's perfectly possible to produce high quality wine in areas with very little rain, as long as the varieties, the rootstocks, and the training systems are adapted. So in the Mediterranean basin and in southern Europe, the vines are very resistant to drought through the selection of drought-resistant varieties and rootstocks. Drought-resistant varieties like Grenache and drought-resistant rootstock as the Berlandieri rupestris crosses like 110R or 140 Ruggieri, which is incredibly drought-resistant. Training systems are very well adapted to drought, in particular the Mediterranean Goblet bush vines, or more generally, medium to low density vineyards. A decreasing planting density is also a way of adapting to drought. And all these adaptations to climate change, you have it in Cyprus and also in other Mediterranean countries, of course. For instance, in Cyprus and in other Mediterranean islands, you have very late ripening varieties. Marateftico ripens 1 week after Mourvèdre, and I've always thought that Mourvèdre was the latest ripening variety in the world. The Mourvèdre, which is called Monastrell in Spain. But Marateftico ripens even later, and there may be even varieties which are even later ripening than Marateftico. And these varieties are a great resource in the context of climate change, because we need to push the ripening period later in the season so that the grapes ripen under relatively cool conditions. And this is important to keep the balance in our wines, not too much sugar, enough acidity, and fresh aromas. In the Mediterranean islands, there are also plenty of drought-resistant varieties. And some other interesting varieties exist in the Balearic Islands. And the research team around Hipólito Medrano has done very interesting research on the drought resistance of these varieties. And once again, these varieties are a great resource in the context of climate change. Once again, Marateftico, Gianudi, and Xinisteri. These varieties were presented by George Manganaris, and we need to explore these varieties. So this offers research opportunities in plant material. We need to characterize precisely the phenology of these local varieties. We need to characterize their ability to produce high quality wine. Of course, this is important to be able to sell the wine for good prices. Some of these varieties may be able to produce high quality wines, but others may not be able to produce high quality wines. We need to characterize their drought tolerance. And this would be really interesting research topics. much more interesting than doing research on Syrah, Merlot, or Cabernet Sauvignon. Training system also deserve our attention. What is the best training system in dry climate? Is it the bush vine? Bush vines have low water needs. The yields are low, but the production costs are also low. And so this means that per kilogram of grapes produced, the production costs are not necessarily very high. Or is it the cordon-trained, irrigated vineyard, which consume much more water? Of course, these vineyards produce higher yields, but also at higher production cost per hectare. In Cyprus, most vineyards are planted as gobelet bush vines, as George presented in his presentation. But in many Mediterranean countries, bush vines are pulled out, and sometimes with subsidies from the European Union. Isn't it strange that we have the training system which is the best adapted to drought, and we pull these vineyards out? In Cyprus, bush vines are still the majority, and 90% of the vineyards are dry farmed. Not only old vineyards, like on the left panel, are trained as bush vines, but even some vineyards are replanting bush vines in new plantations, like here at the Viticulture winery. You see, in a very dry environment, they replant vineyards as bush vines. And I think we can take example of this. Researchers, in particular from the New World, have deeply investigated the most exotic training systems, like the lyre trellis, smart Dyson, Scott Henry, or minimal pruning. But no researcher has ever investigated why the gobelet bush vine is so drought resistant. You can do a literature research. There is no publication on drought resistant in bush vines. Isn't that strange? There are so many bush vines around the world. It's so obvious that these are drought resistant. And then researchers prefer to do research on innovative training systems. And this is typically, I think, an example of how in Europe we imported and we mimic examples of research from the New World. And we ignore basically the wealth of our empirical solutions that exist. Many growers say, well, we pull out these bush vines because we cannot harvest them by machine. But we should not pull out these bush vines. We should design a harvesting machine that is able to mechanize gobelet bush vines, to control the production cost. We need to study the underlying mechanisms of their exceptional drought tolerance. We should study the production cost to see how it would be possible to make these gobelet bush vines economically competitive. And we need to investigate the possibility to market dry farmed bush vines so they can be sold for higher prices. And this is already happening. Look here, a few examples from Australia, dry grown Barossa Shiraz. This is an example from South Africa. This is Senso, a table wine from Senso, but advertised as dry farming, produced by dry farmed old bush vines. I bought this bottle for 25 euros because I was curious. And I think we can promote to the consumers this type of wine. Another example from Chile, Montes Alva produces a wine with dimension sustainably dry farmed. We should make the consumers ready to pay more for a wine which is more sustainably produced, exactly like we do with organic farming. Another possibility is move vineyards to high altitude. And Cyprus is a perfect example where the growers tier maximum profit of exploring high altitudes. This is a picture from the Viticulture winery located at 800 meters in altitude. Look at how beautiful these patches of vineyards are. High altitude, very dry environment. In the Cultivated winery, vineyards are even higher, 1,200 to 1,400 meters. And I saw Mina is in the audience. Hi, Minas. He is running this winery. These vineyards almost look like the Douro Valley. And another example is Chakas winery with vineyards up to 1,460 meters. And I believe this may be the highest altitude vineyards of Europe. And this offers research opportunities. We should explore in which regions it is possible to move vineyards to higher altitude to adapt to a warmer climate. We should study the effects of altitude, temperature, and radiation on vine physiology, grape ripening, and wine composition, because altitude offers the interesting combination of relatively low temperatures with high radiation. Another point in Cyprus is that phylloxera somehow never invaded Cyprus. Most vineyards in Cyprus are not grafted, and they have very powerful rooting systems. Look at these vines on their own roots and how powerful these rooting systems are. They even seem to crack the rocks. And of course, it would not be responsible to promote ungrafted grapevines in a world where phylloxera is all around. But it is very likely that the powerful rooting systems increases the drought resistance of these vines. And so this offers interesting research opportunities. So a good research question could be why the rooting system of these vines is so powerful. Is it due to the genetics that the rootstocks are of the Vitis vinifera species, or is it because there is no grafting? Interestingly, this type of research could only be conducted in Cyprus, because in any other European country it would not be possible to have an ungrafted control. But I'm sure that Nathalie Ola and Elisa Marguerite would love to set up such an experiment in Cyprus. So a few take-home messages. I think we need to be inspired by Mediterranean viticulture, much more than we have done up to now. In Mediterranean countries, wine growers have adapted to hot and dry climates over the past 8,000 years. But both growers and researchers do not seem to be able to see the incredible value of this expertise. And instead, we are working on short-term maladaptations, like replacing dry farm vineyards with irrigated vineyards, or replacing adapted varieties to local conditions by international varieties, which are not adapted to hot and dry climates. And as researchers, we need to investigate the underlying physiological mechanism of the incredible adaptational potential of Mediterranean viticulture. And then we would be working on the production of better wines with an improved environmental footprint. And I would like to close my talk with just a few words about the International Viticulture and Enology Society, which some of you know. The International Academic Association, IVES, was established in 2017 to promote open access publication in vine and wine sciences. And our idea was that publications should be free of charge for readers, no subscriptions, but also free of charge for authors, no article processing charges. And you all know that a lot of editors, they charge incredibly high article processing charges and drawing a lot of money from our research budget. We have 3 journals. You probably all know Enology, which is our research journal. We also have a technical journal, IVES Technical Reviews, and because professionals like to read papers in their own language, all articles are published simultaneously in 6 languages: English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. And last year, we also created a journal with conference proceedings. And already we have more than 1,500 conference papers online. IVES is supported by 24 academic members, including Cyprus University of Technology, 26 private partners, 5 institutional partners, and 3 high visibility partners. And I'm very happy that we are also supported by many researchers, and many researchers donate their time to act as associate editor for Enology. And I would like to say hello to some of them who are present in the audience: Gonzaga Santesteban, Mario Pezzotti, George Manganaris, Nathalie Ola, Stéphanie Savoy, And online, I saw that Marcus Rient is connected and Fulvio Mativi. Thank you very much to all of you for making this possible. And if some of you are part of a university which is not yet member of IVES, I would like to invite you to join this open access movement. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much for the inspiring presentation and also the very provocative presentation I found. So I think you dropped to the audience several questions and several inspiring topics of for the future scientists, science in viticulture. I would like very much to thank you for this, and also I would like to ask to the people in the audience here, firstly, if you have a question, please stand up or raise your hand for any question. Otherwise, we have several questions in the chat, and we will have to handle the question inside the room and in the chat. So, any question from this audience? For the moment, we don't have any question for the audience.
We can start questions from our virtual delegates. Okay. Okay, we have actually one question from Daniela. Keys has mentioned the decreasing average berry size. Do you think this observation is only a reaction to more dry conditions, or can the shortened time frame for fruit development and ripening under warmer conditions be a factor too? Keys, I don't know if you can see the question from Daniela.
No, but I can understand.
Okay.
You're very clear, so I understood this question. Yeah, I think berry size is very much driven by the availability of water, in particular the availability of water pre-veraison. So I think the major effect of smaller berries is the effect of water deficit. A second effect may be the effect of limited nitrogen. People use less and less herbicides, and of course this is a good evolution for a more ecological viticulture. But because people use less herbicides, there's more cover crop, and cover crop can compete for nitrogen. So another effect on berry size is the effect of the effect of nitrogen. I don't think that the duration of the ripening period has a major impact on berry size. No, I don't think so.
Okay, and we have one question from Fulvio. Keys, do you want to read it or you can go over it? I can say it. So
yes, I read it. I read it. Yes,
okay.
That's another advantage of the Gobelet pruned bush vine, is that it has a very, very long longevity. Gobelet bush vines can last for 100 years. Unlike cordon trained vines can live for maximum 30-35 years. So yes, Fulvio, I totally agree that the longevity of bush vines is another advantage of this type of training system.
Yes, I have a question myself. How comes that all these very roughly cultivated varieties that are local varieties, autochthonous varieties, are those that are vinifera that are resilient to drought much more than the widely cultivated varieties, for instance, the Cabernet, the Merlot, and the others that you mentioned?
I think that
there was any way of selection, because grapevine was never irrigated before.
Sure,
How comes that the varieties are more resistant than the other?
I just think that people locally selected varieties which were adapted to their local conditions. So in the Mediterranean area, drought has always been an important issue. And so varieties that were not adapted to drought were simply eliminated. But in Bordeaux, drought is not a major problem. We have 900 millimeters of rain a year. So the fact that Merlot is not at all adapted to drought is not a problem in Bordeaux, because we have enough rain. And Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are not adapted to drought either. But in Burgundy and Champagne, where these varieties were selected, drought is not a problem. So I just think that people locally select varieties which are adapted to their conditions. And so varieties originating from dry and warm areas are adapted to those conditions. Just it's a selection process by the growers. Otherwise, the growers would not have retained these varieties. They would have taken other varieties.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have another question from Christine.
Well, I read your question. Yeah, those talking about adaptive and innovative viticulture. Do you think that application of CRISPR tools can be one of the alternative approaches? Well, I'm not so much in genetics, so I don't have a strong opinion of the tools that can be used. But I think that we need to understand the genetic mechanisms of things as important as drought tolerance. And this is complicated because, of course, drought tolerance is not controlled by one gene, but by plenty of genes. And so because drought tolerance is controlled by so many genes, it may not be easy to include those genes, for instance, in Merlot or in Chardonnay. I think it's very different. Drought resistant is something much more complicated than, for instance, resistant to diseases. The resistance to diseases can be controlled by 1, 2, or 3 genes, and you can possibly include those genes in another variety. But I think drought tolerance is controlled by so many genes that it would be virtually impossible to insert these genes in an existing variety to turn it into a drought-resistant variety.
Aaron Fait from Ben Gurion University. I have a question and a comment. The comment is about the fruit berry weight or size. I'd like to say that from our experiment with shading of the cluster region with irrigated vines, we actually found that surface temperature can be a major impact on berry size and weight. So drought could be a factor, but definitely surface temperature is another one. And the questions to you is actually, do you think we should go back to traditional trellising, in considering that the market essentially wants to simply grow more and more grapes and have a higher yield? Because traditional trellising is not that efficient? Would that really be a good response to the worldwide globalized market?
Well, I think different viticultural models can coexist. For instance, maybe from my talk, you would imagine that I'm totally opposed to irrigation, which is not the case. For instance, in Mendoza, it totally makes sense to irrigate the vineyards because they have 200 millimeter of rain. And so there's no other way to grow vines in Mendoza than to irrigate them. And in those areas, it is interesting to use modern tools to do deficit irrigation and to use as little water as possible. But I think we should preserve dry grown vineyards in Europe where they exist because they can be very performing. I don't think we have to throw that away because if we transform 3 million hectares of vineyards in Southern Europe into irrigated vineyards, then we need a lot of water, and this water will not be available. So I think that dry farming is a skill, and we need to consider it as a skill and maintain as much dry farmed vineyards as possible. And so you say that traditional training systems are not performing, but I believe that the Gobelet system is a very sophisticated system, in fact. And but we need to better understand it, why it's so resistant to drought.
Question from the audience? Yeah.
Hi, Chris. Thank you very much for the very It's Andrea from Cyprus University of Technology. I'm really looking forward to our collaboration on the Marie Curie. My question is, so we've seen I mean, it was partially answered, but you showed that the goblet is so much more adaptive to these conditions of Southern Europe, but you also said that they are actually taking out goblet and they're going towards the Gordon training system. And I've seen it in Cyprus starting to being used. Why would this push wine growers towards Gordon if the goblet, is it actually the lack of research, or is it just a matter of I don't know, easiness of harvesting or something?
I think we are, as there are several points, but I think we are too much influenced by New World viticulture, and that for many growers, it's a sort of modern viticulture. You know, the Goblet bush vines was the type of viticulture from their grandfather, and they want to be more modern, and they are inspired by a New World viticulture. Another point, of course, is mechanization. And in areas where machine harvesting is possible, of course, there's a major disadvantage of Goblet bush vines is that they cannot be harvested by machine. But I think we should turn the problem the other way around. We should not pull up bush vines because they cannot be harvested by machine, but we need to develop a harvester which is able to harvest Goblet bush vines. And this should not be so difficult because fruit trees are harvested by machine. I'm not a specialist in harvesting machine, but a bush vine is a small fruit tree. So if you can harvest fruit trees by machine, you should be able to harvest a bush vine by machine. I think there's no technical obstacle. It is just that no constructor or technical research station has ever had the idea of developing a harvester of the Goblet bush vine. But I think this should be a priority. And I think the European Union should fund research on a harvester for Goblet bush vines rather than funding the transformation of dry farm vineyards into irrigated vineyards.
Thank you very much, Kees. One last question on the chat from Olfa Zarouk, dealing about Verizon stage delay and that several countries in the south, but this means that we will also making longer the period of high water demand.
Yes, sure. This is absolutely true. If you use late ripening varieties, then you ripen your grapes in cooler conditions at the end of the season, which is good for the quality of the wine. It's absolutely clear that the wines are better if the ripening takes place in September or early October compared to grapes for which the ripening takes place in July or August in very hot conditions. If the grapes ripen in very hot conditions, your fruit is not balanced. You have too much sugar, not enough acidity, and not nice, fresh aromas. But I totally agree that if the season is longer, you need more water. And so this is a sort of compromise.
Yes, I think we have to thank you for the wonderful keynote lecture, for again the provocative and inspiring vision that you gave to us. And also, I am also thanking all the people for the question and your answer. And I'm asking if it's possible to have your presentation in PDF. Can we have your presentation? It's
Sure,
already there?
sure, no problem.
Okay, because many people ask here in the audience that if we can have your presentation. I have a question myself too, but for the very last question that I would like to, I mean, there is another point of view that you didn't mention about the scientific publication in grapevine. More and more, when you try to raising up the level of impact factor publication with the grapevine, even if you have fantastic results, most of the high impact factor journal, especially in plant science, they don't care much about grape. Grape is considered not a model, and grape is considered something that is producing alcohol. And it's, I mean, they send you back the paper without even reading what is written inside, because they think that it's not for a big audience. I think something that with your N1, we should stress a review with this, sometimes because it's something that should change. And also there is a problem in Europe because most of the projects that are dropped down by the committee are because the grapevine is connected to alcohol production, and alcohol production is something very bad. Can you comment?
Well, if your paper is refused in a non-vine and wine journal, I just would like to suggest to submit to Enology. Your paper will not be refused, and because your papers are very good, this will raise the impact factor of Enology. So together we can raise the impact factor of Enology.
You know, this was an autogol. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to comment anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keith, I would like to thank you for promoting the Cyprus viticultural sector through your presentation. It is much appreciated. We are looking forward to welcome you again here in Cyprus. Thank you very much for this very inspiring talk.
Thank you,
very
Chris.
much, Keith.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
So now we're moving to the welcome reception, and I would like just to mention that the fact that we have the pleasure to have some very specialty wines from two of the leading wineries of Cyprus. Sophocles Vlasidis is here in physical presence. Hello, Sophocles. He brought some wines, Syrah wines, that is the premium. Yeah, but you know why? Mario, he was about to bring Yanoudi, that is the favorite of Kiss. Yeah. But this is very premium wine, so probably he will take care and bring some Yanoudi wines maybe in the gala dinner tomorrow. That is really very. But on the other side, about local wines, we have from Enology winery, we have one of the agronomists, Nikos, and he brought Maratheftico, that is another noble red cultivar, and Commandaria. So you have to taste this very premium wine, so we can go outside for the welcome reception and continue our talk.
We rush for drink. We're drinking
Okay.
it. Them.
Sophocles, would you like to make a general comment about the sector? Because Sophocles is actually leading all the vineyards, all the people who work in the industry.
I see many thirsty people
Just thank you, everybody. Just a very quick say. It's true that even for us, what was said before, we moved from tradition to new ways of doing it, and thankfully for us, we realized very quickly, and we stopped it, and we are now moving back to the roots, which is the native varieties that are so well adapted.
Okay. And all this situation with drought and the climatic change, and we are on our way. So we did something wrong, but we are changing it very fast. Thank you.